On the night of her 25th birthday, Emma Harper lost everything. Her fiancé, her family, and the illusion that love was safe. Her sister walked into the party wearing Emma's future, carrying the child of the man she was meant to marry. Humiliated and abandoned, Emma left barefoot and in silence. 3 years later, she returned married to a billionaire, dressed in elegance, and ready to expose the truth that everyone at that table tried to bury. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The chandeliers above shimmered like stars, casting a golden glow over the banquet hall. Every inch of the space sparkled, from the glassware on the tables to the silver-threaded ribbons adorning the high ceilings. A string quartet played softly near the floral arch where pink peonies and white orchids cascaded in artful elegance. It was Emma's 25th birthday, meant to be the happiest night of her life. Dressed in a sleek sapphire gown that hugged her delicate frame, Emma smiled at her guests as they toasted to her future. Her fiancé, James Carter, a handsome, well-mannered tech investor, stood beside her, his arm looped around her waist. He whispered into her ear, making her laugh, making her feel like everything had fallen perfectly into place. She had waited for this, worked for this. For once, it felt like the universe was saying yes. Halfway through the evening, as waiters passed around champagne flutes and the guests were ushered to their seats for the dinner course, James tugged gently on her hand. "Emma," he murmured, "can we talk for a moment? Just outside." She looked up, surprised but smiling. "No, you're not proposing again, are you?" she teased, tapping the diamond ring on her finger. James didn't laugh. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting toward the door. She frowned slightly but followed him through the ornate French doors onto the candlelit terrace. The air was cool. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the scent of lilacs floated through the night. "Emma," James exhaled as though it hurt to speak. "I didn't want to ruin your night, but I can't go through with the engagement." She blinked. "What?" "I've met someone else," he said quickly. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." The words hit her like glass shattering inside her chest. "Are you drunk? Is this a joke?" "No, it's not. I didn't mean to fall for her, but we're having a baby." The sound of her own heartbeat drowned out the music from inside. Her breath came in short, clipped gasps. "A baby?" James nodded, eyes lowered. "With who?" she demanded, her voice shaking. He didn't speak. "With who? James?" The silence answered before his mouth did. "Clara," he whispered. The name exploded inside her skull. Clara, her older, beautiful, commanding sister. The one who always had to win, always had to be admired, envied. The one who pretended to be happy for Emma when she first introduced James. "You bastard," she spat, stepping back, her voice breaking. "You slept with my sister?" James looked helpless. "I didn't mean for it to—" She didn't wait to hear the rest. She turned and burst back into the hall, panic and fury flooding her limbs like wildfire. Faces turned. Her mother, seated near the stage, furrowed her brow as Emma stormed through the crowd. And then the doors opened. Clara walked in, late, unapologetic, glowing. Her black velvet dress clung to her swollen belly like it was her proudest accessory. She smiled, brazen, unbothered. Her heels clicked confidently against the marble floor as she stepped into the spotlight. "Oh my God," someone whispered. James followed her inside moments later, walking behind her like a man who had already made his choice. Clara placed a hand over her stomach. "Surprise," she said to the room, voice smooth as silk. "James and I are expecting. And yes, we're getting married." The hall fell into stunned silence. Emma stood at the center, her birthday crown still in place, mascara beginning to run as tears carved through her foundation. She turned to her mother, eyes pleading. But her mother, always the image-conscious matriarch, simply adjusted her pearls and looked away. "No scene," she mouthed. Emma looked back at Clara, who had dared to wear Emma's favorite earrings, the same ones their late grandmother had gifted her. Clara's eyes showed no remorse, no guilt, only victory. In that moment, something in Emma shattered beyond repair. She removed her heels, lifted her dress slightly, and walked barefoot out of the hall. No words, no goodbye, no explanation. No one followed her. Not her friends, not her fiancé, not her mother, and certainly not the sister who now carried what should have been her future. Outside in the dark parking lot, Emma inhaled the cold night air. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she didn't cry again. Not yet. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Texts from guests asking if she was okay. She turned it off. Then she climbed into her car. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew one thing. She would never come back. The night air howled against Emma's car as she drove blindly down the coastal highway. Her dress, once regal, was now crumpled in the passenger seat beside her like discarded royalty. Her bare feet trembled on the pedals. The stars overhead blurred with every blink, tears threatening, but never quite falling. She drove until the city lights were no more than a distant glow in her rear-view mirror. By dawn, she arrived in a sleepy beach town called Seacliff Bay, a place she had visited once as a teenager on a school trip. It had always stayed with her, the pale sand, the salt-thick air, the quiet. She rented a tiny studio apartment above a surf shop. The floor creaked, the walls were too thin, and the water ran rusty when she first turned the taps. But it was hers. No judgment, no betrayal, just stillness. She didn't tell anyone where she was. Not her mother, not old friends, not distant cousins who had messaged her after the fiasco. She deleted social media entirely. Emma Harper had disappeared. Here, she was just Emma. No titles, no glittering ring, no shadow of a sister's betrayal. Mornings began with the ocean. She would walk barefoot along the shore at sunrise, letting the waves numb her ankles and her mind. Some mornings she stood for hours in front of the crashing surf, searching for something. Answers, clarity, forgiveness. Mostly she found silence. And somehow, that was enough. She picked up work at the Driftwood Cafe, a beachfront eatery with wicker chairs and a jukebox that only played songs from the 70s. The owner, Marcy, was a blunt but kind woman in her 60s who hired Emma with barely a glance at her resume. "You got hands? You can hold a tray? Then you can work," Marcy grunted. The first few days, Emma worked like a ghost, moving silently, eyes down, smile polite but empty. But the locals were friendly. They asked nothing, expected nothing. Slowly, they began to remember her name. She began to remember it too. By her third month, Emma had taken up painting again. She bought a cheap set of watercolors and a few brushes from a small supply shop downtown and began sketching the beach, then the customers, then memories she couldn't speak aloud. Her art became a diary. One canvas bore the image of a young woman walking into the ocean, her dress trailing behind like sea foam. Another showed a house of mirrors with two identical women inside, one reaching out, the other retreating. She hung them in her apartment at first, silent sentinels of her healing. Then one day, she brought a small piece to the cafe, a lone seagull flying over stormy waters. Marcy hung it near the cash register. "You've got something," she said with a nod. "Storm's over." "Yeah," Emma smiled faintly. But later that night she cried for the first time since she left home. Not in pain, but in release. One foggy afternoon, while sketching under a boardwalk pier, a little boy wandered up to her. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his hands sticky with ice cream. "A storm cloud," Emma replied, flipping the sketchbook for him to see. "Want to help me shade it?" He grinned and reached out with a chocolate-smeared finger. His father came running over moments later, apologizing, laughing. "Sorry, he makes friends with everyone," the man said. "I'm Daniel." Emma looked up, caught off guard by the warmth in his smile. He wore flip-flops and a hoodie, carried no phone, and had a look in his eyes she couldn't place. Tired, maybe? Curious? Real? She nodded. Emma. Their handshake was brief but electric. He didn't know her last name, didn't ask what she was running from, didn't recognize her from any online scandal. That made her feel safe for the first time in a long time. They talked briefly that day about weather, about art, about the tide. He left with a wave and a quiet promise. "I'll see you around." She didn't expect him to come back, but he did. 3 days later, he showed up at the cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat in her section. Then again, the next week, and again. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence watching the sea, and slowly, in the quiet between coffee refills and sketches, something stirred in her again. Not anger, not longing, hope. Daniel became a rhythm, a presence. Like the tide that came and went, he appeared in Emma's life with a kind of effortless persistence that didn't demand attention. It earned it. They never planned their meetings. He would walk in with sand still clinging to the soles of his shoes, sometimes bringing his sketch pad, other times nothing but a folded paperback and that quiet smile that always left her a little unsure and a little more curious. They met at cafes, on driftwood benches, beneath the wide-open skies of Seacliff Bay. Each time their conversations peeled back another layer. "Why did you come here?" she asked one afternoon as they sat by the dunes, sipping lemonade from shared glass bottles. Daniel picked at the edge of the label. "Needed to be somewhere no one expected me to be." She arched an eyebrow. "Running from something?" "Not running. Escaping." She didn't press. She knew the difference intimately. They talked about books, music, sandcastles, childhood fears. Emma told him about her father, how he died when she was 17, how it turned her mother into steel and her sister into competition. She never told him about James or Clara or the night that fractured her life. Not yet. Daniel, in return, gave her fragments of a life that sounded both distant and familiar. Growing up in cities, boarding schools, the pressure of being a name. "A name?" she asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just someone expected to live a certain way. It gets tiring. She studied him then. How he always wore plain t-shirts, how he walked without security or pretense, how he paid in cash and rarely looked at his phone. There was something stripped down about him, like a man determined to remember what it meant to be real. One morning, Emma was painting alone near the marina when she saw a commotion. Paparazzi. Not the frantic kind, but 2 or 3 photographers, long lenses slung over their shoulders, scanning the crowd like hunters. She followed their gaze. Daniel stood across the street, wearing his usual hoodie, sunglasses pulled low. He looked tense, angry even, as he turned away and ducked into a side alley. Her heart dropped. She packed her easel in a flurry and followed the alley until she found him leaning against a brick wall, his jaw clenched. "Daniel," she said. He looked up. "They found me," he muttered. "Who?" He took a long breath, rubbed his temples. Then, like a curtain being drawn back, he said it plainly. "I'm Alexander Whitestone." The name meant nothing at first. He studied her face. "CEO of Whitestone Technologies. Well, Google me." She blinked, stunned, but didn't move. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "I came here under a fake name. Just wanted to disappear for a while." Emma felt like the ground had shifted. All those quiet coffees, barefoot walks. Was it all just an act? "You lied to me," she said, stepping back. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "Emma, people chase me for money, for power, for proximity. I needed to know that someone could like me. Not the billionaire, not the brand. Me." She folded her arms. "And what if I'd done the same?" "You didn't," he said softly. "You never asked for a thing." The silence between them stretched, heavy and uncertain. Finally she spoke, her voice low. "You say people want to use you, but you used me too. You hid. You let me get close without knowing who I was getting close to." "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry." She looked away, out toward the boats bobbing in the harbor. "I ran from everything I knew because someone used me, lied to me, chose someone else over me like I didn't matter. You think I'd let myself be fooled again?" Alexander took a step closer. Then don't let me be the next person who hurts you. Let me be the one who proves not everyone will." She wanted to believe him. She almost did. But all she said was, "I need time." And she walked away. That night she couldn't sleep. Her past and present collided in her mind like waves against rocks. Clara had paraded her betrayal like a crown. James had discarded her like old clothing. Now Alexander, a man who made her laugh, who listened, who saw her, wasn't who he claimed to be. But something lingered. He had shown up in the most ordinary ways, made no grand gestures, never once made her feel small. And he never looked at her like she was someone to be pitied. 3 days passed. Then one morning she found a package at the cafe. No name, just her initials scrolled on a note. E.H. Inside was a painting, a sketch she had drawn weeks ago, a storm cloud over a lonely boat, but reimagined in bolder strokes, richer color, stronger lines, and a note. Even storms can carry us somewhere better. Alexander. Emma clutched the canvas to her chest, her breath catching. For the first time in years, her heart didn't ache with betrayal. It beat with possibility. The chapel was quiet. So quiet Emma could hear the echo of her own breath bouncing gently off its stone walls. It sat on a hill overlooking the Amalfi Coast, tucked between cypress trees and wild rosemary, far removed from tourists and cameras. It wasn't grand, adorned in gold or marble, but it was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Clean, whitewashed walls, hand-carved pews, and windows that let in the sun like soft-spoken blessings. Emma stood at the altar barefoot, a crown of baby's breath and olive leaves tucked into her loose, dark waves. Her dress was linen, simple, flowing, soft, like the sea wind that threaded through the open doors behind her. No corsets, no diamonds, no stage. She turned slightly, her gaze catching the horizon. The ocean shimmered like glass. The wind danced through the chapel, lifting her veil for a moment and letting it fall again like a sigh. This was not the wedding she once imagined. No endless guest list, no towering cake, no mother adjusting her train, no sister whispering cruel envy disguised as compliments. There was only peace, and him. Alexander stood at the far end, watching her like she was something sacred. He wore a charcoal gray suit, the jacket slightly wrinkled from travel, the collar of his shirt undone. He held no phone, no business calls buzzing in his ear, no assistant hovering at his side, just a small sprig of rosemary tucked into his lapel and the raw, unpolished look of a man in love. They didn't speak as the officiant began. They didn't need to. The ceremony was brief. No pomp, no performance, just vows, quiet, trembling, honest. "I never thought I'd trust again," Emma said, her fingers trembling as she placed the ring on his hand. "But you made me believe in something better than survival. You made me believe in joy." Alexander blinked against the tears threatening to fall, his voice rough as he spoke. "You're the only real thing I've found in a life built on illusion. You see me, Emma, and I swear I will never hide from you again." They kissed slowly, gently, like two people who had already fought the war and chosen peace. The chapel erupted in birdsong just as they stepped outside, the late afternoon sun bathing them in warm gold. Later they sat on a picnic blanket behind the chapel, fingers interlaced, their shoes forgotten in the grass. There was no reception, no band, no speeches, just a bottle of Sicilian wine, crusty bread, and a small chocolate cake Alexander had bought from a local bakery that morning. Emma took a bite, laughing as frosting smeared across her cheek. Alexander leaned in and kissed it away, smiling against her skin. "I still can't believe you're mine," he whispered. "You don't own me," she said, her eyes teasing, "but I'll stay willingly." He grinned. "Fair enough." At sunset, they danced alone on the gravel path behind the chapel. No music, no beat, just the rhythm of her head on his chest and the sound of the waves far below. Fireflies blinked like scattered stars around them. "Do you miss them?" Alexander asked softly after a while. "Your family?" Emma didn't answer right away. She thought of her mother's disappointed sighs, Clara's smug smile, the silence that followed her departure like a curse. Then she thought of now, of this soft wind, this stolen joy. this moment untainted by the past. "I miss who they pretended to be," she said finally, "but not who they were." He nodded. "If you ever want them back." "I don't," she said gently. "Some chapters don't deserve sequels." And with that, she turned her face toward his and kissed him again, like punctuation. Not a question mark, not an ellipsis, but a period. A full stop. The end of one life and the sacred beginning of another. The invitation came by accident, a text message that reached Emma while going through emails and messages she hadn't checked in months. It read, "Emma Harper. No middle name. No and guest. No apology." It was formal, overly so. "You are cordially invited to a birthday dinner in celebration of Clara Harper's 35th birthday. Private dining. The Belmont House, Westchester. Formal attire. No cameras, please." Emma stared at the name. Clara. 3 years had passed since the night that shattered them, since betrayal became a birthright, since she walked barefoot from a party that wasn't hers into a life that would be. She placed the phone on the kitchen counter next to a bowl of lemons and the wedding ring Alexander always removed before doing dishes. She didn't decide right away. She walked the beach for days. She sketched her sister's face more than once, not as it was, but as she remembered it from childhood. Radiant, cunning, incomplete. And then one morning, she awoke before dawn and simply said aloud, "I'm going." She didn't warn anyone, not even Alexander. He found her trying on dresses a week later, silk, deep green, slit high, elegant but sharp. There was steel in her choices now, not armor, but precision. "You're sure?" he asked, watching her from the doorway as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. "I'm not going for her," she said. "I'm going for me." He said nothing, only walked over and slid his arms around her waist. "I'll be right beside you," he murmured, "even if you burn the place down." She smiled faintly. "Oh, I won't burn it. I'll just show them what healing looks like." The Belmont House was everything Emma remembered. Excess polished into aesthetic. Velvet walls, crystal sconces, staff trained to speak in reverent hushes. The valet took their keys and didn't even blink at the sleek black car Alexander drove. Laughter echoed. High-pitched, brittle, manicured. Emma's heels clicked like metronomes on the marble floor. The hostess looked up and froze. "Name?" she asked politely, though her eyes betrayed recognition. "Harper," Emma said calmly, then added, "Whitestone." The woman's expression flickered. They were led down a hallway lit like a dream. The dining room doors loomed ahead, grand and gold, and then they opened. The room fell silent. Clara stood near the head of the long, candlelit table, frozen mid-laugh, one hand still holding a glass of champagne. Around her, guests turned, half of them familiar from childhood holidays, the rest undoubtedly new followers in her carefully constructed kingdom. Gasps broke the silence like firecrackers. Emma stepped into the light. Her dress shimmered like emerald flame. Her posture was unshakable, her gaze calm and cutting. And Alexander Whitestone, walked beside her, hand on her lower back, smile polite but distant. Someone whispered, "That's him." Clara's face drained of color. "Emma," she said at last, her voice carefully measured. "You came." Emma tilted her head. "You invited me." Clara blinked. "I didn't. Your assistant must have done it. Or your PR team." She glanced around. "Nice turnout." Silence followed, thick and palpable. Clara looked older. Not in the way years soften a person, but in the way regret hollows them. Her dress was designer, her hair perfect, her makeup sculpted, but nothing hid the shadows beneath her eyes, and yet she forced a smile. "Well, I suppose... Welcome back." Emma said nothing. She walked to her seat, Alexander following, and the room resumed its shaky rhythm. Dinner began. The dining room had never been so quiet. Forks lay abandoned on linen napkins. Candles flickered nervously, casting long shadows along the oak-paneled walls. The guests, fashionably dressed, delicately perfumed, were no longer whispering or peeking at their phones. Courses arrived in silence. Truffle risotto, seared duck, roasted figs. Conversation resumed, but only in fragments, broken by furtive glances. No one knew what to say to her. Clara made occasional eye contact, but her mask was cracking. Her laughter rang hollow. Her daughter, a beautiful girl of 3, sat quietly at the table, playing with her spoon. James was nowhere in sight. Emma studied her, the child, the tiny person born of betrayal, and felt nothing cruel, only detachment. They were watching Emma. She stood tall in front of the floor-length window, the city skyline glittering behind her like a stage set. Her wine glass was empty, her voice calm, but her presence thundered through the room like an approaching storm. "I know this wasn't on the agenda," she said, her tone silk-wrapped steel. "But since I've been invited back into the room I was once shoved out of, I think it's time I said a few things." At the head of the table, Clara stiffened, her jaw locked, hands resting in perfect stillness atop her lap. Her birthday tiara, delicate and silver, now looked absurdly childish. 3 years ago, Emma began, her eyes scanning the room. On a night not so different from this one, I was celebrating something. My birthday, my engagement. Murmurs rose from the crowd. One woman lowered her fork slowly. Another sat upright, recognizing where this was going. "I had what I thought was love, security, a future," she continued. "And in one evening, this one, my fiancé, ended it. And a few minutes later, I found out why." Emma turned to her sister. "It was you, Clara. You stood in front of my guests, my friends, our family, and announced you were carrying his child, that you two would be married instead." Clara flinched, but only slightly. Her expression tried to hold, but her daughter, seated beside her with a confused look, touched her sleeve as if sensing the shift. Emma didn't falter. "You didn't say sorry. Not once. You smiled. You glowed. You acted like you'd won a prize." Her voice lowered, but the words struck harder now. "You didn't win anything. You stole what you didn't even want to keep." A sharp inhale broke through the room. Emma stepped forward slightly. "And when I left, when I walked out without a coat, without a plan, without a home, you all let me go. No one followed me. No one called. Not even you, Mom." All eyes turned to Margaret Harper, Emma and Clara's mother, who looked pale under the dim chandeliers, her pearls clutched in one hand, her eyes brimming with a silent regret she hadn't yet spoken aloud. Emma inhaled slowly. "But here's the thing," she said. "What you all didn't know is that leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to find myself, to choose myself." She turned toward the other end of the room, toward Alexander, who stood beside the door, hands folded, his quiet strength radiating like a lighthouse. "And in doing that, I found love again. Not the kind that disappears the moment it's tested. Not the kind that trades commitment for comfort. I found something real." Gasps again. A few guests finally connected the dots. Alexander Whitestone, Billionaire CEO, the man quietly famous for never appearing at social events like this, and now, here for her. "I didn't come tonight to hurt anyone," she continued. "I didn't come to embarrass you, Clara, or shame this family." She looked directly at her sister now, eyes unwavering. "I came because healing deserves an audience. Truth deserves a voice, and tonight, that voice is mine." Clara finally rose from her seat, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "Emma," she said softly, almost pleading. Emma met her gaze. "I forgive you," she said. "I do. But I don't forget. And I will never again make space for people who tried to erase me." Clara's lips parted. No apology came, only the glimmer of tears. Real ones. "I'm sorry," she whispered, broken now in a way she had never allowed herself to be. But it was too late to fix the foundation. Emma smiled gently, a kindness edged with finality. "I believe you," she said, "but believing you doesn't mean trusting you." She glanced down at the little girl by Clara's side, wide-eyed, silent, innocent. Emma bent slightly. I hope she grows up to be the kind of woman who never has to beg for space at her own table. The child nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of the moment. Emma rose and turned to the crowd. To those of you who watched me fall and said nothing, don't reach for me now that I've learned how to stand. And then she looked back at her husband. Alexander. He moved to her instantly, placing his hand gently on her back. Without another word, they walked out, not hurried, not shaken, just finished. And as the heavy doors shut behind them, all that remained in the room was silence and reflection, and one woman, Clara, left sitting beneath the flickering lights of a celebration that no longer felt like hers. The night air was thick with rain that never came. Emma stepped outside the Belmont house with Alexander beside her, the distant hum of city traffic barely breaking the silence. Her heels clicked softly on the damp pavement, echoing between parked cars and trimmed hedges like punctuation after a final sentence. Neither of them spoke. There was no need to. But the hush was short-lived. "Emma, wait." The voice was too familiar. Not panicked, not angry, just strained. She turned slowly. Clara stood on the steps, her shoes in one hand, the other clutching the doorframe like a woman not sure whether to step out or stay hidden. Her hair, once perfectly pinned, now fell loose around her shoulders. The birthday tiara was gone. Her face, stripped of pretense, was almost unrecognizable. "I need to say something," Clara said, voice catching. "Please." Emma nodded. Not forward, not back. Just still. Clara walked toward her slowly as if unsure of her own footing. "I deserved everything you said," she began. "All of it, and more." Emma said nothing. "I was jealous," Clara admitted. "Always have been. You had this light. People liked you without you trying. I had to fight to be seen, to be chosen." "You weren't chosen," Emma replied calmly. "You took what wasn't yours." Clara winced but nodded. "I did, and I told myself it wasn't wrong because I loved him. But I didn't. Not really. I just didn't want you to have something I didn't." Emma exhaled sharply. "And you lived with that?" "I paid for it," Clara said quietly. "James left 6 months after the baby was born. He said I wasn't who he thought I was. Funny, right? The man who lied with me didn't like being lied to." There was no victory in her voice, no dramatics, just weariness. "I've been alone for 2 years. And tonight, seeing you, hearing you, I realized that the person I hurt the most wasn't just you. It was me. I turned myself into something monstrous. And for what?" Silence passed between them, broken only by the wind curling around the corner. "I'm sorry, Emma. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I needed to say it. I needed to tell you I was wrong." Emma looked at her sister for a long time. She could see it now. The regret Clara carried like an invisible wound stitched into every word. Her face had softened, her shoulders slumped in surrender. This was not the woman who smiled at her pain 3 years ago. This was someone else. Smaller. Human. "I do forgive you," Emma said, her voice low, even. "Not for you. For me." Clara blinked, tears welling. "But forgiveness isn't an invitation," Emma added. "It's not a door you can walk back through." Clara nodded, eyes rimmed red. "I figured." Emma turned slightly, glancing back at the door behind them. "And Mom?" "I'll tell her to come out," Clara offered, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "She's been crying since you left the table." A moment later, the door opened again. Margaret Harper emerged, wrapped in her ivory shawl, like she was bracing against something colder than the weather. Her face, always proud, always polished, was crumpled in a way Emma hadn't seen since her father's funeral. She stepped forward, but not too close. "I failed you," Margaret whispered. "As a mother, I cared more about keeping the family from embarrassment than protecting my daughter from betrayal. And I told myself you were strong. You didn't need me to take your side." Emma's breath caught. Those were the words she had waited years to hear, though she never believed they'd come. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Margaret continued, "but I'm asking for your peace, not mine." Emma studied her for a long moment, then looked to Clara, who stood quietly, no longer pleading, just waiting. And then finally, she nodded. "I forgive you both," she said. "I mean it. But I don't want either of you in my life," Margaret inhaled sharply. "Not even, no birthday cards," Emma said softly. "No brunches. No, let's catch up for coffee. I'm not doing the polite version of love. Not anymore." Her voice didn't waver. "This isn't punishment," she added. "It's protection." Clara's eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. "I understand." Emma stepped closer, just for a moment. "I hope you heal," she said to her sister. "I hope you find peace," she said to her mother. And then she turned, taking Alexander's hand. He hadn't interrupted once, didn't offer his opinion, just stood beside her, letting her own her closure. And as they walked away, Emma didn't feel vindicated. She felt free. Back at the hotel, she untied her hair and stood at the balcony overlooking the lights of the city. Alexander walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How do you feel?" he asked. She leaned into him. "Clean," she whispered, "like I finally put down a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying." He kissed her shoulder. "You didn't just survive them," he murmured. "You outgrew them." She smiled, resting her head against his chest, listening to the rhythm of a life she had reclaimed. The airport was quiet at sunrise. Glass walls glowed with soft amber light, and the terminal smelled of brewed espresso and new beginnings. Emma sat by the window, her boarding pass tucked inside her passport, watching planes drift across the tarmac like slow-moving birds. She hadn't said goodbye to anyone, not to Clara, not to her mother. There had been nothing left to say. Forgiveness was not a bridge back. It was the closing of a door. Alexander sat beside her, one hand resting casually on her knee, the other scrolling through emails with half-interest. He wasn't worried about press or gossip or what society would make of their appearance at the Harper event. That life didn't touch them anymore. Emma looked out the window and exhaled. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. 6 months later, the ribbon was cut on the opening of the Marie Gallery, Emma's seaside art studio turned public exhibition space. It wasn't just a gallery. It was a sanctuary. The walls were covered in paintings, storms, rebirths, faceless sisters, women walking alone into oceans and coming back different. There were canvases shaped like open wounds and others like windows into someplace quiet and warm. There was no plaque with her full name on it, just a small signature in the corner of every painting. E.H. She hosted young artists, ran workshops for teenage girls who had been told they were too much or not enough, and created a scholarship fund in the name of her father, the only person who had ever seen her without competition. Reporters came eventually, tried to draw the story out. The betrayal, the billionaire, the broken family. But Emma never indulged them. She never said her sister's name again. In their coastal home, a low, sun-washed villa framed by olive trees and jasmine, Emma and Alexander created a quiet kind of life. Mornings were slow. Afternoons were spent working side by side, her with a brush, him with a laptop and a lazy mug of coffee. They never argued over trivial things. They never performed their love for anyone. It just was, and it grew without condition, without apology. On her 30th birthday, she stood barefoot on the same beach where she had first met Alexander. The tide curled over her toes, cool and soft. Her dress flapped gently in the wind, and she held a small piece of paper in her hand, a letter she had written to her younger self. She read it aloud to the wind. "You were never too soft. You were never too trusting. You were never a fool for believing in love. They were fools for thinking they could break you and still define who you'd become. Look at you now. Look at how you lived." She folded the letter, placed it in a glass bottle, and let it drift out to sea. She still saw Clara in the news sometimes, occasionally in magazines, always in curated poses. There were stories about messy custody hearings, a new book deal, a skincare brand that flopped after launch. Her mother had stepped out of the public eye, rarely seen save for fundraisers where she clung to the past with diamond-studded hands. They sent Christmas cards still. She never opened them. Sometimes at night, Emma would lie beside Alexander and think about the woman she had been at 25. So sure her life had been built, so unaware it had been made of glass. She no longer wished to undo what had happened. Some stories must break before they can breathe. She had lost everything once, but she had built something better from the ashes. A life not just beautiful, but hers. And in that final, quiet truth, she found everything she never thought she deserved. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.